Okay, it's 2 p.m. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for being here. My name is Emily Riley. I'm the Director of Public Engagement at Bard Graduate Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today for our program. Our exhibition, Eileen Gray, is currently open to the public on timed entry. So we'll be posting a link in a moment in the chat that will show you how to reserve spots for that. We're also offering weekly virtual tours of the exhibition led by our gallery educators. And again, I'll post a link for the chat in the chat for that as well. Before we start, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. This was co-authored by Curtis Davia, who's the executive director of the American Indian Community House, and Jennifer Rittner, who's the founder of Content Matters. So while we have the privilege of convening virtually today, we also have the responsibility to acknowledge that many cities and institutions in America were founded on the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including those on whose land, Mannahatta, from which we are hosting this event this afternoon. The land of the 5 boroughs that make up New York City are the traditional homelands of the Lenape, Merrick, Canarsie, Matinecock, and Rockaway nations. Despite systemic erasures, these lands persist as intertribal lands under the stewardship of many nations, and over 115,000 intertribal Native American, First Nations, and Indigenous peoples who currently call New York City home. In addition, I would like to acknowledge those here today who did not arrive on these shores of their own free will and whose tremendous cultural, economic, and technological contributions continue to provide the foundations of our lives. Thank you for joining us today. Our program today features Caroline Constant, who is an architect who likes spending time in archives. Caroline served as an advisor on our Eileen Gray exhibition, and her research features heavily in the exhibition catalog, which is available to purchase online. And again, we'll provide that link in the chat. Caroline will be in conversation with Emma Cormack, who's an associate curator here at BGC. Emma served as editorial and curatorial assistant on the Eileen Gray exhibition. So she spent the better half of the last year and a half deeply immersed in everything Eileen Gray. Throughout the event today, we invite you to submit questions through the Q&A function. I will then do my best to get these questions answered during the question and answer part of the program, which will be about 15 minutes at the end. But we're thrilled to have you here today, and I'm going to pass the mic, as you will, over to Emma Cormack, who's going to, again, give you an idea of what to expect today and get the program started. So thank you so much for being here, and Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. Thank you, and thank you for joining us, and welcome. As Emily said, I'm Emma Cormack, and I'm very happy to be here today with Caroline Constant. So if you've joined into any of our previous Zoom events organized around the Eileen Gray exhibition at Bard Graduate Center Gallery, you'll have heard a bit about Eileen Gray's career as an architect, but today we're going to delve deeper into her architectural drawings. So also, like Emily mentioned, the exhibition, we have reopened it to the public for the next week and a half, and you can come visit via timed entry slots on Eventbrite. So Emily will post that link in the chat now, and if you'd like to come see the exhibition, follow that link and come in. And if you are not in New York and can't come to the exhibition, you can also visit our online exhibition companion, which Emily will also post in the chat. And here you'll see information about the objects on view, as well as more information about Eileen Gray and her career. So let's get started, and I'll hand it over to Caroline.
Thank you all. It's really a pleasure to be afforded this opportunity to speculate about something that I haven't actually written about, but that has been part of my thinking about Eileen Gray for a while. So using her drawings for her early projects, I want to speculate about her evolution as an architect and her approach to issues of inhabitation. because most of her drawings are unsigned and undated, and many were destroyed during World War II. It is difficult to determine certain facets of her career with certainty. Thus, other scholars might disagree with certain ideas I'm positing here. I want to start by showing you, just for those in the audience who are not familiar with the conventions of architectural representation, a few of the drawing types that I'm going to focus on. First, a sketch, used to study various things, the existing conditions, to convey an idea diagrammatically or probe the three-dimensional implications of an idea. And here is on the left is an ocean liner cabin plan sketch that Gray did on her way to Mexico City in 1934. And you can see how she's thinking about a kind of minimal living environment, a theme that was prominent in her architectural production, and carefully dimensioning every aspect of her room. And then an aerial perspective of a four-story villa, which I believe was a private commission, though she claimed she didn't have private commissions. And this is just studying the three-dimensionality of a scheme for which there are more elaborate plans and elevations in her archive. Next. Axonometric projection is a measured drawing with dimensional precision, maintaining scalar proportions, often from a three-quarter view. So this is an image of some of the window details at E1027, the most famous house that she designed. And I'll talk about that more later when we get to it. Next. The composite drawing, in which plan, section, and elevations are combined and kind of projected from each other so that they correspond, was a really favorite device that Gray used to represent her ideas. And I think it's an idea, I'm speculating that it's an idea or a form that she got from Jean Badavici, who seems to have also used this drawing type prominently. So as I said, it's studying the interrelationships among plan, section, and elevation. So it's measured drawings again with precise performance, precise measurements. And so she used it for the nonconformist chair that she designed for E1027 in about 1929, as well as for this small apartment building that she designed possibly in the mid-1930s. Next. And then there's a special use that she made of the composite drawing, which is a variation that I call kind of fold out plan and elevations, which she used for rooms. And this is a form of drawing that had been used in the 18th century and which Gray adapted to her particular ideas about spatiality and the qualities of inhabitation in a room. And I'll describe that a little more carefully later on.
So we see evidence of Gray's architectural thinking relatively early in her career, during the period in which she's designing interiors and furniture for sale at her Paris Galerie Jean Désert, which we see here. Could you tell us a little bit about this project and the few drawings that survive?
Yes, so the Galerie Jean Désert opened in Paris. I think it was in March 1922, but I'm very bad at dates. I know that was the year. And I believe that this was her first tentative venture into architectural design, and that it was most likely carried out with the assistance of Jean Badavici. So I'll show you the drawings that I'm using to justify this argument next. So this is a small perspective sketch of the entry to the shop, which is in her archives at the V&A in London. Which I think shows her initial concept for the design. It's a perspective, but it's not if you try to actually follow the lines, it doesn't really make sense three-dimensionally. So I think it illustrates that at this point in her career, she wasn't really conversant with the full means of architectural representation. What's important about this sketch, I think, is that it represents the rejection of the conventional display window that optimizes the kind of views of the objects on display. And so the walls seem to recede and project from the facade of an existing building to create a protected entry sequence in which passerbys are able to glimpse views of the interior and might be enticed to enter. And I sort of think of this quality of Gray's work as being analogous to kind of active seduction. Although this idea, well, let's go to the next one first. So another sketch, which she included in her notebook on Notes on Light, is a section through the facade of a shop, presumably this shop. And you can see the figure standing in the sidewalk and looking through to a kind of raised portion that is subdivided by vertical plates of glass, so that natural light could be admitted into the basement of the shop, but the viewer walking by could not see into it. And so looking sort of indirectly, again, sort of this notion of enticing you to view into the interior. But you notice the very naive kind of childlike quality of Gray's sketch. So she's conveying this same idea, but again, without a kind of sophisticated idea about architectural representation.
So typically we know Jean Badavici as Gray's collaborator on her most famous house, E1027, and we think that they met sometime in the early 1920s. Could you tell us a bit more about why you think that this was a project that they both worked on?
Yes, so there's this, it's actually a pair of drawings, but it looks like it was originally one drawing in her archive at the V&A in London, which I believe was done by Jean Badavici. It shows the facade of the building almost as it was built, but not quite, and a partial section and a partial plan, just the idea of the facade. And it's a precisely measured drawing. And I believe that, so this is that composite form that I was talking about before, that I believe Jean Badavici really preferred, and that became one of Gray's preferred ways of representing her architectural ideas. But there's no evidence that she was capable of making an architectural drawing such as this as early as 1921 or 22. And we know that she met, as Emma said, we know that she met Jean Badavici sometime in the early 1920s, and that they worked collaboratively until 1931. Nevertheless, it's very hard to determine the kind of precise contribution that Gray made to their collaborative efforts in relationship to those that Badavici made. To reiterate, most of Gray's drawings are unsigned and undated. And so there's this, I think, problematic propensity for certain scholars to attribute much of the collaborative work to Gray alone. And it is very clear, I think, that Badavici played an important role in this project. So also, I think it's important that the composite drawing would become a primary vehicle, not only for Gray to work out her design process, but particularly to represent the results in publications. This particular drawing shows an inset entry to the left with the door sort of projected slightly back into the building. But that's not how it got built. If we look at the next image, you can see the facade as it was built, and we can go back and sort of ask ourselves, okay, now the facade is completely flat, the entry's on the right, there's a service door on the left. But how did Gray manage to carry this kind of initially quite complicated three-dimensional idea into effect in a simple flat plane. There's a couple of ways, and we should remember that Gray took most of her own photographs herself, so she's obviously staged this photograph to convey some of these ideas. First of all, there are, in the doors, there are these lacquer panels, white lacquer panels with tiny circular pieces of glass that would, again, let light through but not allow view into the gallery. The curtains, she has the curtains partly drawn, but also you can see in the right-hand window that's more open, there's a black panel that sits behind the window, and she displays some of her carpets in front of it, but you can't see fully into the gallery. You can only see that there is space in the gallery. So again, this kind of tactic of delayed gratification, inducement to entry, which was soon adapted more broadly for Parisian shop prints, although critics attributed the idea to others. I think it really started with Gray, even if others weren't aware of her ideas.
And just for brief context, so we know that Gray, like many of her peers, was not professionally trained as an architect. She didn't go to architecture school. So instead, her friendship with Badavici afforded her the opportunity to essentially teach herself to understand the basics of architectural design, both by visiting examples of contemporary architecture and then studying, and in one case, tracing over, as we'll see in the next slide, certain architectural drawings that Badavici published in his periodical L'Architecture Vivante.
Next, yes. So exactly, on the left is a page from an early volume of L'Architecture Vivante. I think it was published in 1924, of a project by Adolphe Loos, an unbuilt villa on the Venice Lido of 1922. And it's called Small House, Petite Maison, in L'Architecture Vivante, the publication that Badavici published in Paris, 1923 to 1933, I believe. And on the right is a drawing that Gray sketched directly over that drawing. It's literally drawn at the same size as Loos's image at the top of the page. And here we see Gray starting to kind of transform Loos's image in a way that is quite not like Loos at all. One thing that is characteristic of Loos's architecture was later called by one of his employees the round plan. The idea that the room, the kind of three-dimensionality of the room, was a kind of primary device, even though it might be spatially contiguous with another room. There would be different floor height, different ceiling height, etc. And so Gray is basically not using this device here. She's using essentially a flat floor plane. And then if we look in the next pair of drawings, Gray is then continuing to transform Loos's idea using this device of the not in the same way that Loos laid out his drawings, but using the composite drawing with the plans and elevations and sections projected from the plans in a way that yields the image on the right, the three-dimensional image on the right, the axonometric projection, which was not a normal kind of way that she tended to use her drawings.
And I think too, the fact that she uses color in this sketch on the right has always stood out as sort of strange to me. It's quite different from the other examples we've seen already today, some of which are either sort of seem quickly drawn or are very clean and seem ready for publication. So what do you make of this strange, colorful design?
Yes, you're right. I think this is not a manner of drawing that she would normally use. She rarely drew axonometrics. And particularly, she didn't use color in this way in her drawings. Perhaps this was a way, I'm just speculating here, of distinguishing this early design from the work of Le Corbusier, whose contemporary designs were very much in her mind at the time. And if you could show us the next image, I think particularly that the form of this transformation of Los's villa seems to be inspired by Le Corbusier's coeval work, such as the model of the Maison Citroën exhibited at the Salon d'Automne of 1922, where Gray herself had some furniture exhibited. So it's likely she saw this model in the exhibition.
So now we'll move on to Gray's most famous house, E1027, which she designed for and with Jean Badavici only a couple of years after working on this house for Los. So can you speculate about the role of on-site experience during the construction process? How might that have played into her evolution as an architect with this project? And then can you also speak to how the role of drawing for the design process was perhaps different than the drawing for presentation and publication?
Next. Right. So E1027, as many of you might know, was the subject of a special issue of L'Architecture Vivante, published in 1929, winter 1929, I believe. This is the house on which Gray collaborated with Jean Badavici and built for Jean Badavici on the coast of France in Roquebrune-Cap-Martin, 1926 to 29. I believe that because Gray was living nearby on another site that she'd already purchased for herself at roughly the same time, she spent 3 years roughly on the site. Badavici would come to visit periodically and offer criticism. But I think that Gray really learned how to build and how to think more clearly three-dimensionally through working with the contractors and the specialists who were involved in the construction of this villa. I think that was really important to her because she continued to work with certain of these people longer in her career. We know that the Badavici was the editor of L'Architecture Vivante, as I said before, and that this is the only issue, the only volume of L'Architecture Vivante that is devoted to a single building. So obviously it sort of held a special place in that kind of re-examination of modern architecture that Badavici was undertaking. So next, so we can look at, particularly the publication was a source of many of the drawings that I'm going to talk about here. I should say that there are many sort of conventional plans, sections, and elevations for the house in her archive, but we didn't use them in the catalog. So I'm going to really speculate more about how she represented the building in the publication than how she used it to develop the design. So the site is isolated directly on the Mediterranean, reached only by a footpath. And Gray worked with the existing step contours of gardening terraces and lemon grove on the site, but she shifted the house slightly to align more carefully north and south, not precisely north and south, as opposed to the geometry of the terraces, to take greater advantage of solar orientation in the building. This thus differentiating the building from its site. And in the catalog to the exhibition, Renaud Barres argues that this shift makes the house more ship-like, more nautical. So in this case, it's the drawing on the left from L'Architecture Vivante is a composite, but the plans and the sections and elevations do not correspond directly to the plan. They were all drawn as separate drawings. So all these drawings exist separately in her archive. So this is really a representational technique trying to kind of convey the three-dimensionality in relationship to the site strategy of the house. Next. A more prominent drawing type that exists in her archive is this composite drawing of the E1027 living room. She did one of these drawings for every room in the house, actually. And she published several of them in L'Architecture Vivante. And so this, as I said before, is where the the elevations are kind of rotated about the plan so that you could kind of fold them up and almost like make a model of the room. This was an 18th century drawing technique that was used to represent each room as a discrete volume. But Gray's really using it in a different way because she's thinking more about kind of overlapping zones of space and overlapping functions. So we have in this volume a kind of, starting from the lower left in the plan, a sleeping alcove opposite a dressing room. Right, right, exactly. And then it's a little hard to read the kind of, because she's drawing some of her furniture on top of the plan, but then the main volume, which you're looking at in the image on the right, looking from the right toward the left of the drawing, is the kind of living room. She called it a living room, using the English phrase. And then there's a dining sort of alcove off to the right. So it's a complex spatiality and also a complex kind of interweaving of functional zones in the room, but all compressed within a flat ceiling and a flat floor. Next. So as I said, she did this kind of drawing for every room in the house. They exist in her archive at the V&A. And here we're looking at the bedroom, the master bedroom, looking from the bed in the photograph toward a dressing area to the left and then a studio to the right. And in L'Architecture Vivante, she used color in this drawing to kind of distinguish those separate zones. But on her own copy, she typed in English, "The colors chosen for reproduction have no relation to the reality." I love that. Next. Oh, sorry.
So we see these overlapping uses for each room, and we see this idea too in some of the furniture and fittings that she designed for the house. For example, a lot of the furniture, as you can see in these photos here, is lightweight and relatively movable, so that you could move it to different spaces and use it for different things. For example, there was a cork-topped dining table that you could drag wherever you were using it, and it incorporated cork on the top to muffle the sound of silverware, and so you could eat in peace.
Next. Yeah, so she did distinguish between the furniture that was mobile and that which was permanent and built in. And I consider the windows at E1027 to be kind of an example of that. They're all kind of designed in the service of the engagement of the human body. And unlike Le Corbusier's use of the strip window, for example, to frame a distant view and bring the foreground and the background into kind of direct relationship, Gray is much more interested in the window as a layered mechanism in which there are always curtains. There are these sliding windows that could open fully to admit the light, the most amount of light, the greatest view, and the greatest amount of kind of air circulation. And then these sliding shutters that could also be moved out of the way, but provide protection from the glare of the sun at midday. And in this drawing in each of the window mechanism, for which Bottavici obtained a patent in France and the United States, maybe. I can't remember, but at any rate, we saw the axonometric of the windows on the top of this drawing previously, but here I think it's of interest that Gray, in the drawing submitted for the patent, it is signed E. Gray and J. Bottavici. So, no sort of feminizing of her name. Of course, the name Eileen wasn't really understood very well by the French, but clearly she and Bottavici both designed this window mechanism, even though he was the one who obtained the patent. But what's important here is about the body in relationship to the window, the way in which the human figure could kind of control and manipulate the amount of view, out, the amount of view allowed in, the amount of air entering in, the amount of sun entering in. And I think this bodily kind of focus of all of her designs, of her furniture and the house itself, is really crucial to Gray's contribution. Next. I particularly like this bedside table in the sleeping alcove off the living room, which here you see a composite drawing in plan, section, and elevation. And she designed this table to kind of fold out and meet the occupant of the bed with a piece that folds up to hold the book, and above it a kind of reading light, which could alternate with a night light for rest. Next. But the most unusual drawing type, which I didn't talk about before because it's really Gray's invention, is this plan diagram of the solar impact of the building, and together with the kind of modes of circulation through the building. So you can compare the plan of the principal level, which you see on the left, with the diagram I'm talking about on the right. And here, she shows the sun, soleil, rising in the morning, waking up in a sense, and going to bed at night on the left. So she's very interested in the way that the sun penetrates the house and affects how one lives in the house. In fact, in all of her buildings, the bedrooms face the rising sun to the east, and the living room space the sun, the kind of maximum solar orientation and primary views to the south. And then in this drawing also, she kind of compounds it by indicating the circulation of residents and guests, which are indicated by solid lines that originate in the path toward the house, a small circle in the path towards the house, and then move into the house and then kind of distribute throughout. And then there's the other, and those are all solid lines. And then there's dotted lines that she uses to indicate the housekeeper. It's always been confusing to me why there's a room for a housekeeper when Bottavici, I don't think, could afford to have a housekeeper, but that's a complicated question about who actually lived here and why and when. And so what's interesting to me is that there's one very heavy line indicating where those two paths would come into conflict right there. And that's actually not a door. There's no door there. There is a door to the bathroom, which Emma's pointing to now. So the kind of issue of privacy, both in terms of what could be seen from outside the house. There was nothing built around it at the time, but still privacy would become an issue later. And the issue of the kind of freedom to move about the house without operating in conflict with a potential servant. Next.
So as Caroline has alluded to, there are still many questions about Eileen Gray's architectural work and whether she was involved in several projects that don't necessarily bear her name. So I understand that certain scholars have challenged the extent to which Gray participated in Bottavici's work in Vézelay, which is the next project we'll look at. So Caroline, this is an idea that you introduced in your book on Eileen Gray, published in 2000. So are there new discoveries of drawings that help clarify this question of her involvement for you?
Next, yeah. So thanks to Tim Benton, I've recently come to question my earlier account, and the recent discovery of further drawings has only heightened my doubts, but I think there's no definitive proof in any direction. In common with many admirers of Gray's architecture, I was perhaps too quick to associate drawings held in her archive with her hand. Others who have worked more closely on Bottavici's work as an architect have logically concluded that he was responsible for many of the drawings that I originally attributed to Gray. So for example, the Maison Renaudin in Vézelay of 1926 to 31, Bottavici was commissioned by his friend, the painter Yves Renaudin, his neighbor in Paris to renovate a pair of old houses in Vézelay that had been purchased by his mistress, Olga Batachon. And this plan sketch from Gray's archive, composite plan sketch and partial elevation from Gray's archive includes numerous items of furniture with flexible rotating elements similar to the furnishings she designed for E1027 and for other projects for Badavici and Vézelay. And so Gray, as you said, never took credit for any of this work in Vézelay, but she was possibly responsible for the furniture. And so I speculate that this drawing could be a kind of represent a conversation between Gray and Badavici, in which she drew some of the furniture on the plan, and he was responsible for the architectural drawings. Just to indicate the correspondence between the drawing on the right and the photograph. The right-hand part of the photograph is the facade that is being looked at directly, just to orient you. Next. And then these two drawings are in the exhibition. They're pretty small. Composite drawings of a different version of the same house, an earlier version of the same house, because the drawing I just showed you is more like the way it was realized. But in these drawings, they're attributed to Eileen Gray and Jean Badavici in the catalog, but I question that attribution. I think, and through conversation with Mary McLeod, she suggested that they could possibly be the result of Jean Badavici's work with the owner, Yves Renaudin, who was a painter himself, who painted in watercolor. I'm not aware, although Gray used gouache frequently, very frequently, I'm not aware of a lot of watercolor images in her work. And so I think this is more likely that Badavici and Renaudin worked together on these drawings. And in fact, we know that Renaudin supervised the construction in conversation with Badavici. Next. And I would say a similar thing about the Badavici house in Vézelay, 1927 to 31, because the next year after Renaudin purchased these two houses, Badavici purchased two old buildings and began to renovate them also. And so here again, we have plans possibly that Gray participated in, but probably that Badavici initiated. They're from Gray's archive in London. And on the right, we have a facade drawing that is very similar to the facade drawing I showed you earlier for the Galerie Jean Désert. Sorry, my dog is driving me crazy. Stop it. So this composite drawing with a partial section, a partial plan, and the elevation itself is also distinguished by the use of regulating lines, indicating the proportional relationships of the elements of the facade, a device that Le Corbusier frequently used. And I'm only aware of Gray using these kind of proportional device in one set of drawings that she did, one facade set of drawings that she did later in her career. Here again, we know that Gray designed some of the furniture for this house. And so possibly these drawings were kind of the result of a conversation they might have had about the idea. But the spatial idea of the house is very Corbusian. There's a double height living room, a narrow ship stair that leads up to a balcony. And we also know that Le Corbusier painted his first mural in the upper level of the living room of this house.
So apart from these projects in Vézelay, we know that many projects that can be attributed to Eileen Gray because she included them in two portfolios that she started compiling beginning in 1956, both of which are now in the collection of the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. So here, alongside photos of furniture, interiors, and architecture, she pasted brief descriptions as well as reproductions of drawings. And most of these projects are labeled and helpfully often have a date.
Next. So this is an example of a project that Gray and Beatrice collaborated on with a secure date and secure attribution. This drawing from the V&A is in Gray's hand. On the upper right-hand corner, you can see her handwriting when she got kind of older, and it's sort of not such clear handwriting. But at any rate, she seems to have titled the drawing after she drew it. This is a camping tent from 1931 on which she collaborated with Beatrice. And which was exhibited at the second annual exhibition of the Union des Artistes Modernes, of which Gray was a member. And that exhibition was in 1932 and attributed to both of them. And on the right, you see a model reconstruction done by one of my students several years ago. I really love this project because it's indicative of Gray's interest in the minimal living environment, such as we saw with her sketch of her ship's cabin, and also of her interest in the kind of workers, the new kind of legislation affording French workers, paid vacation leave and so forth. She described the tent as foldable and lightweight, capable of being carried on a motorcycle. And it had plastic discs in the side, which she said, quote, wide enough to let the night air through, but small enough to provide a barrier against dogs. This is what it says in one of her notebooks. So as I said, this project reflects her long-standing interest in minimal living in living environments, their adaptability for use, for different kinds of use, and her concern for the new leisure opportunities for workers legislated by the Popular Front.
So moving forward a little bit, one could argue that Eileen Gray's most significant built work is the house Tempe Apaya, which she built for herself a few miles from E1027. Would you say that there are significant differences between this design, which she developed independently, and that for E1027, which she worked on with Beatrice? And can you tell us what about the drawings reveal these differences?
Yes, I think actually the subject of their differences could be a full lecture in itself. It's an interesting question nonetheless, but here we see a view from the road of Tempe Apaya, realized between 1931 and 35 on property that Gray purchased, I think in 1926. And the accompanied section to the right, section drawing. And this site had a cabin on it that she lived in, I believe during construction of E1027, but she tore it down, and it also had 3 cisterns that she maintained and used in her design. And you can see the kind of rough stone walls of the cisterns. In some cases, she projected those walls upward. In other cases, she kind of cut them down and superimposed her own columnar construction, reinforced concrete, and stuccoed facades. And so what this kind of building on the existing cisterns gave her was an opportunity to differentiate the volumes of the house, much in the manner of Loza's round plan. I don't think she was thinking actively about Loza's round plan. I'm not sure it was even being speculated about in those terms at this time, but certainly the idea that each room had its own distinct volume, that the layers of the floors and ceiling were modulated to accommodate those differences. And I think she actively chose not to kind of level the playing field, in a sense, to give a kind of tabula rasa for her new construction, which you can see in the next image. So the image on the left is a very early study for this house, where in fact the floors are flat, and there isn't that kind of subtle differentiation that I'm talking about. And it's much more Corbusian, this drawing, with in this composite drawing with the facades and sections projected out from the plan, although the kind of distribution of spaces is pretty much as she realized it. And in one of the final plans, it's just a partial plan on the right, you can begin to see that the orthogonality of the walls is being modulated to accommodate the existing cisterns, to accommodating an existing public footpath that moved around the house. And so there's a much more kind of subtle interrelationship of parts to each other as it was realized, which we can see more completely in the next pair of images. On the left is Gray's drawing, one of Gray's drawings in the V&A of a design development plan, which shows that the kind of clear structural grid is only kind of minimally obvious here, and that the many of the columns are sort of embroiled in the walls. Teo, stop it. My dog's driving me nuts. And in this final, a plan as built, drawn by Stefan Hecker and Christian Muller, who had access to this building. I've never been able to get into it, even after I had several appointments to visit it. The columns are really kind of only seen in isolation, and so you're never aware that there's a structural grid, for example, such as in the sketch that she started with. So we have this kind of subtle here. You can see also in the plan is built, you can see this footpath moving around the house, and the way that the walls are kind of curved to meet that existing condition. So we've got the adjustment in elevation to meet the cistern walls that she was very selective about keeping, and the kind of shifting the walls off the orthogonal to accommodate those walls as well. Next, and we can see some of this this spatial. I would have to show a lot of images to show the kind of spatiality of this house, but we can see some of that differentiation in level in the bedroom, where the view on the right, this is a part of a page from her notebook. The view on the right is a view from the bed towards a kind of adjustable closet that could pull out and open, and the dressing area, which is at a few inches above the level of the floor in the bedroom. So we have that kind of transformation taking place here.
And here again, we see that modular furniture. So this cabinet here on the right, this unfolding cabinet, is in the exhibition. And like Caroline mentioned, it's meant to sit at 2 different levels. So it's got 2 different feet. So it seems like Gray is always thinking about storage in her design. Could you talk a little bit about the storage at Tempe at Paya and what we can see in her drawings?
Yes, next. So here's an example. She's using storages everywhere. One of my favorite examples, I couldn't find an image to show, but one of my favorite examples is in the stair. There's, I think, 2 steps that go down from the entry dining room into the study living room, and she used them as bookshelves with kind of coffered ceiling overhead with storage above that. So there's storage everywhere, but in these drawings are diagrams of 2 of the methods of storage that she used in this house, with an image on the left of the bar, which when the kind of surfaces open up, become steps to lead up to further storage above the ceiling, the gridded ceiling. And similarly, in the pantry, she did a similar thing with a higher kind of storage compartment above it. So this kind of use of every kind of cubic volume of space is really typical of Gray. And she did similar drawings in 1931. She finished an apartment for Bottavici in Paris that used this kind of mechanism, which she also displayed at the one of the exhibitions of the Union des Artistes Modernes. And so in that case, however, Bottavici wasn't involved in the design of his own apartment for some reason. She's credited alone. So we can see her thinking through this kind of idea about storage in section here in these diagrams.
And do we also see her making composite room drawings for Tempe Apaya?
Yes, but not to the extent. Can you show the next one, please? Not to the extent that she did for E1027. So here we have this is a piece of the original section you see on the right that I showed you earlier, through the first cistern, which she turned into a garage, with a sleeping room above that was either for the chauffeur or a guest room, and the kind of access stair leading up to the terrace above. This is a complicated drawing. I don't want to go through it in any detail, but basically the elevations are not folded out from the plan. They're kind of opposite their location in plan. So I think this is an indication she was using this drawing type to, in this case, not to represent an idea, but to work out the kind of complex three-dimensionality of this particular zone of the house, which even has a clear story lighting coming in from the surface of the terrace above, a banquette that she built on the surface of the terrace above. And the next one too. This is the other one. These are both in the Gray Archive in Dublin, National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. And this is the kitchen, kind of pantry, and a service yard. And here the facades, the elevations, sections, room elevations and sections are folded out from the plan. But again, I think she's using this drawing as a way to kind of work out the complicated three-dimensionality of the drawing. And then here again, my favorite drawings are these ones where she invented them. I'm really aware of no one else who was working with this type of drawing in architecture. And so she did the same solar diagram, plan diagram, showing the solar impact and the circulation system through the house, with the sun getting up in the morning, going to bed at night, toward the west, with views to the city and the sea to the left. And the sun, in this case, the sun is originating with a disc that she put in the ceiling of her bedroom, with a kind of operable disc that could be manipulated to allow more light, or sort of control the amount of light coming in throughout the course of the day. And in this case, there doesn't seem to be the kind of conflict between the movement of the resident, of the occupant, Gray herself, and her housekeeper, Louise Donny, who lived with her for years and years and years, decades really, lived past her death. And so there's the kind of a different spirit is conveyed in this drawing, but I particularly love this idea of the sun originating in the drawing in the bedroom with its solar disk. So thank you.
Yes, so this solar drawing is in the exhibition. So like I mentioned at the beginning, if you are in the New York area and you're able to come see the exhibition, we'd love to welcome you in until October 28th. And if not, please visit our website to learn a bit more about Eileen Gray and these objects. And now we have a little time for questions, so Emily will field those. And thank you again for joining.
Hi Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. That went so quickly. Can't believe we're almost at 3 o'clock. If you have questions, please, either you can chat them to us or you can put them in the Q&A. But right now I have one question for you, Caroline, from Jacob. Were there any licensing requirements that Eileen Gray had to creatively work around at the time?
Licensing requirements for her furniture?
Building, likely for architectural requirements, or Jacob, if you want to elaborate a little bit in the chat, feel free.
I mean, there's always zoning requirements and so forth, and I'm actually not that familiar with them, to be honest. Okay,
great. I'll move on to the next question. Sorry, Jacob, we don't have a very good answer for you there. So this is from Mary's clarifying for us. Hi, Mary. The word licensing means registration for others. Got it. Thank you for that, Mary. Keith wants to know, did Gray produce many speculative drawings of unbuilt work?
Many. Many. And they're in the catalog to the exhibition catalog. She really worked on architectural proposals for many, many years. I think the most worked out examples are the vacation center that she designed, which Le Corbusier exhibited in his Paris exhibition 1937, and the cultural center that she designed about a decade later, which for which she did very extensive drawings, models, etc. And these are, I think, really important aspects of her career in which she was really interested, as I said earlier, in the kind of new freedoms afforded to French workers and their ability to travel and have vacations, and then the kind of government's idea of proposing means to kind of keep people in the provinces by developing cultural centers regionally in France.
Great, thank you. Great question, Keith. Thank you for that. Anyone else have? Caroline, is there a question that someone is yet to ask you that you want to answer?
Oh my God. Well, I think this talk was one that I wanted to, because, you know, this isn't something that I've published before, but it's more something that I'd been thinking about in the back of my brain, and sort of wanted to take this opportunity to work out a little bit more. I don't intend to publish any of these ideas, but it's always good to kind of rethink one's earlier preconceptions, let's say.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to give folks another minute to post any questions they may have into the chat or in the Q&A. I have a question from Jan here. I thought your description of the perspective for Jean Desert interesting, because I'm not aware of many perspective drawings by Eileen Gray. Are there more? Are you aware of more?
I'm just trying to think, you know, it's been 20 years since my book came out, so I don't have all her work in my brain. But I think, no, I don't think it was a kind of prominent means. It's hard to know because so many of Gray's drawings were destroyed during the war. And so it's kind of hard to know exactly what kind of drawing she was using throughout her career. They were destroyed both in her apartment. She had an apartment in Saint-Tropez that was bombed right after World War II. And a lot of them were destroyed that were stored at Tampere during the war. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Thank you. I have two more questions for you, Caroline. So the drawing technique, read the movement of the sun around the house that you pointed out towards the end there, has that approach been adopted by others afterwards, that sort of tracking of light through the day? Is that a practice that you've seen in architects following Eileen Gray?
Well, there are different ways of doing it. Le Corbusier was fond of tracking the path of the sun in relationship to his architecture, but not in relationship to movement through the house. And so I think what's different about Gray's representational technique is precisely this notion of the inhabitant and how the inhabitant is affected by the path of the sun in terms of the use of the house throughout the day.
Great, thank you. I might send this one to Emma, actually. So Kathleen is asking, she's so well known for her furniture. What was the balance of focus between furniture and architecture throughout her life?
Good question. So we, one of our goals of the exhibition was really to present Eileen Gray as this very multifaceted designer and architect, where she's working her whole life really in furniture design, whether that's at the beginning of her life, she's working for on commissioned pieces for clients, but later we see her designing furniture for Tempe Apaya, for her own residences. But I guess maybe Carolyn, you could speak better to the percentage of, you know, what time she spent on architecture versus furniture, but it seems like she's doing at least furniture her whole life and architecture for much of her life.
Yeah, she kept working on furniture after she stopped doing architectural proposals, but yes, definitely she did the two simultaneously. I think it's interesting that when I was first doing my work on Eileen Gray, this is a couple of decades ago, or 3 decades ago, I think I started, she was really known among certain people as a furniture designer and among others as an architect. And the two were not often discussed simultaneously, but they're so integrally related to each other that I think it's very hard to separate them out. It's just that there's specialists who study one thing and specialists who study the other. But yes, they're totally intertwined throughout her career, really.
Great, and we have, I guess, 3 more questions, and then we'll call it quits for time reasons. But Caroline, do you want to comment on the Le Corbusier murals in E1027? Do you think the preservation of them was a good move in respect to Eileen Gray's attitude towards them? Is there anything you want to say on that?
Yes, a little bit. So we know that Bottavici welcomed the murals, that Le Corbusier painted his first mural in Bottavici's house in Vézelay, and then subsequently, and that Bottavici published an essay celebrating this idea of the destruction of the walls by paint in L'Architecture, in French periodical. And so the idea that Le Corbusier would, I don't know that if Le Corbusier offered his services or if Bottavici initiated the idea himself, but the painting of the murals at E1027 was certainly something very contrary to Gray's spatial idea. And so I think that it is an indication that Bottavici didn't really understand Gray's spatial idea. That's my interpretation anyway. And I think that, so the murals have been very controversial. I've been to many meetings where they were the sort of the only thing that was discussed, which gets kind of tiresome. They're certainly worth more than the house in monetary terms, as Michael Leakerman, who was in charge of the restoration of the villa, is quick to acknowledge. So there was no question they couldn't be removed because they're painted on the walls. They're not frescoes. There's no sort of depth to them. A fresco penetrates the plaster, and thus it can be removed. And so it took a while, but some of them have been covered over with panels that can be cover them up or reveal them. I think it's very important that they be maintained. I was once at a symposium in Dublin where this question became prominent, and all the people who were in attendance who had known Gray felt they should be removed, and all the architects in the room thought they should be preserved. They're part of the history of the house, and to simply remove them, I think, would be criminal. So they're spatially very disconcerting, but an important part of the history at any rate.
Great, thank you, Caroline. A question from Mary. Mary was wondering about the drawing techniques. Adrian Gorska, who P. Adams claims taught Gray architecture. Has anyone looked at the similarities and differences between Gray and Gorska?
I don't know. I haven't seen, aside from Peter Adam, who's not always trustworthy, to be honest. I haven't found any reference to Gorska in Gray's archive. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because a lot more material is now available than what I originally used for my book. And I also have never looked into Gorska's work herself, but I think it's an interesting topic that would be very useful for someone to take up.
Great, thank you. And I have 3 more questions, and then we're going to call it quits for the day. This is from someone who joined the conversation late, but there is a study of Sydney University about the orientation of the house E1027 and the sun path along the seasons. Is there in any archive drawings showing a precise geometric orientation of the house because of the sun, a heliographic diagram, etc., of E1027?
I don't really understand this question. I don't know what the study of Sydney.
In addition to the drawing published in L'Architecture Vivante, are there others, I think is the question.
No, just these 2 houses.
Just these
2 houses. Yeah.
Any other drawings that look at the sun from Eileen Gray's archive that you know about, Caroline?
No, but the same orientation pertained to her final house, Lou Peru outside Saint-Tropez. So we know that the idea remained important, but the graphic technique, at that point she was 80 some years old, the graphic technique was no longer a kind of issue for her.
Great. 2 more questions. Did she work with any employees or drafts people at any point in her career, or did she produce the majority of her drawings herself? This is from Keith.
I don't know. I think she produced most of the drawings herself. I don't think she ever had employees that I know of.
Great. And this is a large question, and it's a nice one to end on, but are there other female architects working at in the period that we don't have a lot of info about that we should? Like, are there other? Eileen Gray came to prominence later in her career. Are there other artists that we should be digging for?
I think, Mary McLeod is really the specialist in this area, and particularly all her work on Charlotte Perriand, who was basically a contemporary, though much younger than Eileen Gray, and worked for Le Corbusier before establishing her own practice in Paris. I once tried to interview her about her relationship with Gray, and I wasn't allowed. I was told she wouldn't talk about anybody but herself. So I got nowhere with that one. I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are lots of women that we don't know about. But I think looking through periodicals, one finds very little, aside from Charlotte Perriand and Eileen Gray.
Great. Well, I think we'll leave it at that. Someone is also saying Julia Morgan. Heidi.
Well, that's a lot earlier, yeah.
Earlier, check out.
And not in Europe, obviously. I mean, there are a lot of American architects, women architects, that are being cataloged basically in the what's it called, the women's, I can't remember what it's called, the archive that's in my brain's not working, sorry.
No problem. Mary's commenting that she got the same answer from Perion. And if folks can see this, I'm going to mispronounce this name, so I'm going to type it for everyone to see, but Marlene, Poelzigis, is someone worth looking into. But at Virginia Tech.
Oh, Virginia Tech is the, sorry, thank you, Mary. That's the, that's where the archive is of women in America, American architecture. And it's a very extensive archive with lots and lots of women.
Great. So those who want to go further and really dig into this, check out the archive at Virginia Tech. And I will just say thank you so much to Caroline and Emma for joining us on a Saturday. This event is also in collaboration with Open House New York, which is usually an in-person festival that gives you rare access to sort of architectural gems around New York City. They've gone virtual this year, as we all have had to do. So do check out other things available through Open House New York. As I said before, the Eileen Gray exhibition is open. We are doing socially distanced timed entry slots from now until October 28th. So please check out our website and the link posted earlier in the program that I will try and find now for you to access timed entry. We also have virtual tours happening, so you can check out our virtual offerings there if you cannot join us in person. And we are recording this event, and once we've edited it a little bit, we'll publish it on our YouTube channel, and it will likely be disseminated in eBlast and things like that. So that'll take us a little bit of time, but this event will be available to watch.
I hope you can edit out my annoying dog.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your Saturday. Enjoy the sunshine if you're on the East Coast. It's a lovely autumnal day. And please, thank you for doing everything that you are all doing to stay safe and to keep us all safe and healthy. Thank you so much for joining us, and take care.
Thank you, Emily and Emma.
Thank you.